everyone. Welcome to episode 419 of This is Whole Life, where together each week we dig deeper into the message presented here at Whole Life Church in Orlando, Florida. And that conversation, should you choose, could include you. 407-965-1607 or podcast at wholelife.church. Many of the questions you will hear today come from people just like you and me that have tuned into the service, and they are already listening for that and having their place included. And I can run one more cable.
No, you guys are good. It's fine.
Okay, I thought you were going to be like way later.
We literally just started.
Yeah, we're just starting. Okay.
And if I'm being honest, I haven't had a chance to watch the service.
Okay, that's cool.
So,
And that, friends, was Pastor Ken, or just Ken if you're tuning in on a weekly basis.
thank you. I know you did great.
Yeah.
So I haven't worried about it. All right.
Okay.
I will pop it out, but thank you guys.
Okay. So, first and foremost, that was Pastor Ken, or just Ken. Now, we're going to get down to a special guest. So, to my left, as always, is the lovely Dr. Bachman. Yes, applause. I need to get some applause on this board. I really, really do. It's lacking. And to my right, in the seat of Ken, is Dr. Elias.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. First time on the podcast.
Yep.
I think he's been on a podcast.
Yes.
But first time on our podcast. And I just wanted to start off by saying mentoring youth and young adult leaders in spiritual disciplines is the name of his thesis.
Nice.
Yep. And I was going to prepare for yours, and I didn't. I forgot again.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So
That's
I
fine.
think the tradition alive of
I'm
just...
glad you could remember Dr. Elias's, but not mine.
Yeah,
Sure.
I was going to look it up, and then it got late, and so, or early, whichever way you want to think of that. And I'd also want to say, like, every year, you guys know this is my absolute favorite time of year at the podcast, just because we get to meet new people. The Voices of Whole Life series is absolutely my favorite. And Nate and I had a talk about podcasting. Oh man, this is a couple months ago. And then I heard I'm like, oh. And then my wife was like, oh, she's like, Nate, she's like, him and I've had conversations. And so, you are obviously infiltrating at every level possible as a Whole Life member and just being here. So
Yeah, he's on the production team.
I know he's everywhere.
He's everywhere.
Yeah, I think.
And now he's on the podcast. Welcome.
There was a song about that somewhere. Wasn't it Johnny Cash? I think. Everywhere Man, something like that. Anyway, second, you picked a great week to be here to speak. Because the young adults that were doing the worship leading, holy, like, wow.
Our collegiate team.
It was a collegiate team. Yeah, they set you up like, man, right across the plate. They knocked it out of the park. People in the chat, I was pinch hitting in second service for Stanley. So for those of you watching online, we're like, hey, wait a minute. What happened to Stanley? It's Randy. And I'm like, yeah, sorry about that. I know you can't replace a Stanley, but we do what we can. But they did an amazing job. And so big kudos to Melanie and Albert for making sure every week they're put together and ready to go. And then just being in the chat this week, if you've never, I would even encourage you, if you're not, like, maybe you're local, like you don't have a need necessarily other than I'm not going to make it to church today. It's raining, whatever, or I just don't feel like getting out of bed early enough. I'm going to worship from PJs with a hot drink on the couch. If you're missing the chat, you're missing a whole part of the worship experience at Whole Life. Again, I'm not saying you'd have to be there every week if that's, if you're here in person, but you should stop by and check it out because what an amazing family that is every single week. And this week was just exceptional. All right. And we have 2 emails this week.
Ooh,
Whoa.
2.
Two.
Okay.
So we're going to start with the first one. It said, hey, Randy, I really enjoyed Nate's message this last Sabbath. It just shows how our walk with God can be beautifully complicated. I really liked the concept that Nate presented about giving ourselves permission to connect with God the way we were meant to. I love that. As always, I'm keeping the Whole Life family in my prayers, and that gives it away to
Carolina Days.
There you go. So there you go. First person that of many in the chat that were going, this is something new. I enjoyed it. This is a message I needed to hear. And then from Nashville, Tim, we did ask last week for a follow-up to his question about the gathering of stones. And he said, could this be things people collect, things that bring joy? So, Tim, I think that's my Harley. If we're going to make this connection, he said, I've never interpreted this passage as stones to throw at someone. Now I have a lot to think about. Thanks, Alicia. But he said, I've also read this text in the context of the time it was written. And he went on to give us an outline of, in that time period, young men collected stones to build a house, start a family. And this interpretation would relate to what Miss Melanie mentioned regarding reproduction. As a young man in the first century, I like to think it would have brought me joy to collect and acquire a lot of stones so I could build a house and start my family. This being the non-intellectual viewpoint for sure. On the other hand, the Old Testament mentions the gathering of stones to mark a location, erect a monument, so future generations can be reminded of what happened at that location. This could bring joy to the erectors of the monument since they would know the momentous occasion would not easily be forgotten. Today, we don't necessarily collect stones to build a house or a monument, but we do collect other things that bring joys like Harley Davidson's. That's not his words, not my words, not his. Ceramics that look like chickens. I liked that one. That was a good one. I just think God wants us humans to have a joyful life, and collecting things can be part of that joy. And in the meantime, who knows? Collecting these things may lead to a house or monument being constructed. Just maybe. So there you go. He broke it down in 3 different ways. And he had me at ceramics that look like chickens because Rudy the Rooster is a little lonely here in the studio. So, Tim, if you have a ceramic chicken that you'd like to donate to the studio, I'd be happy to give Rudy a friend. That's all I'm going to say. All right, Nate, there was questions about the book that you referenced. So I want to make sure we get that started. And don't worry, don't wait, don't be on, What's the name of the book? And we will put a link in the show notes. Oh, he brought a copy.
Yep. 3 Colors of Your Spirituality.
I didn't know it. He had it sitting on his lap, and I didn't even notice it. The 3 Colors of Your Spirituality.
Yep.
So if you buy the book, does that mean you can take the test?
It does. It's right in the book.
There's about 10 of you right now that are furiously looking for the pause button and going to the show notes so that you can go ahead and grab that link and get your book ordered.
I actually ordered mine already last week. But you know what? It arrived and the assessments were already filled out. So I was a little disappointed. I thought I bought a new copy.
Maybe this is prescriptive now. They're just like, look,
let us just tell you what you should be.
We don't even care who you are. This is what we think everyone should be. Here's your book. Please enjoy. Well, let us know if your book comes prescriptive as well. I would love to know if this is just an anomaly or if this is really a thing. Maybe we can talk to the publisher and maybe we can get a cut here at WholeLife. If enough of us take this, maybe we can, I don't know, somehow monetize this for our benefit. All right.
I can tell you, if you go to the official site where the book from the publisher, you'll know you're there because it will end in an andrews.edu website.
This was done through...
Andrews is the North American host site for NCD.
I obviously went through a non-sanctioned route. That's where I got my prescriptive copy.
So maybe what we should do then, we should support the brethren and maybe put the Andrews link. And that way we won't have maybe we can get rid of the prescriptive copy problem. All right. Well, 3 Colors of Your Spirituality. This was, before I get there, my left arm rests on my right. What does that mean? Because I don't know what it means. I forget.
I don't either. I know he said it the second service, but I was kind of
Albert
distracted.
was saying that if you tend to put your left arm over your right, that means you're left-brained, and if you do your right arm over, it means you're right-brained. So whether you tend more or logical, rational, or more creative.
Okay. I'll clear my throat.
I don't know if that's scientific or not. I'm just saying that's what I was told.
It's confession time on the podcast. I thought, and I was here, I listened to the message, I was in the chat with everybody. And last night, as I'm preparing for the podcast, I'm like, when's Nate going to talk about that left arm and right arm thing? And I just asked that question to you like you really knew, like you'd done some research on it. And it was Albert.
Yep.
And now I need a button that goes, wah, wah, wah. Because I wrote some of these questions on Saturday. But just knowing that I'm going to be, doing the podcast. Wow, it is early on a Tuesday morning. This is not what we normally tape.
Not our normal time. This is pre-coffee.
So, thanks,
Nate would like a redo.
Well, getting into the message, you had me you were taught a contractual relationship with God, the scary version of Santa Claus looking for the bad so he didn't have to save you. And immediately my childhood was like coming back to me. And tell us, for someone that may not have been immersed in that, maybe like we were in that time and maybe in that place, I loved the picture you put up of like describing where you were from and like kind of putting that on there. Trying to paint a picture for people. If you haven't been in that, because there were some people that the camera was panning and I'm watching some heads and I saw a couple heads like tilt to the side. Like maybe I don't know, or maybe I'm not resonating with that particular piece. But for a lot of others, even in the audio on the podcast of the message, you can hear people like, oh yeah, come on now, preach it. Like you can hear it in the background. But maybe for someone who hasn't lived that part, can you describe it in more than just in the Santa Claus analogy that you did? Because I feel like there's a piece of that I want to get to in a minute, that if you haven't lived that, or that hasn't been your interpretation of the feelings or whatever that you had then, maybe they're missing the next part. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about that.
If you grew up in a Adventist family that became an Adventist family in the 70s,
okay,
many of the influencers at that time were very focused on what you had to do to be, quotes, good enough, all the way to the point where you didn't even say you were saved. That was like a no-no. Mm-hmm. You weren't allowed to say that. I remember as a kid hearing debates, Sabbath afternoons of, could we say we are saved, or was that a sin in even making that statement? Could we only just have a hope that we'd be saved at the end?
Oof.
And that philosophy then played into everything, whether it was the food, what clothes you wore, your theology of who Jesus is. All these things then were shaped out of this. You have to reach a certain level of almost holiness just for God to say, okay, now I can save you.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you were going to say, because it was really what you're describing. It was all encompassing. Like there was no part of you, there was no part of your theology, even if you were too young to know that you had theology.
Right.
But you knew that whatever it was you were thinking wasn't what they were thinking. And wow, if they knew what you were thinking, oh boy, then you were really going to, like going to bed at night going, well, I hope Jesus doesn't come tomorrow because I don't think I'm going to heaven. Right. And being actually scared about that. So given that, as you grow up with that, and maybe someone hasn't had the cathedral moment that you had, right? We'll get to that in a little bit. But so how are they supposed to kind of put this all together if they've had the first part, but they haven't really had the second part because no one has said it's okay? Mm-hmm. When Jesus died on the cross, that was the salvation. You just have to follow, John 3:16, right? does that mean that we're still created in his image? If we've come so far since basically Adam and Eve, even with the sacrifice that Jesus made, is it possible that we still are created in this form that we're in now, that we're still created in the image of Christ or of God, so that we still can feel like maybe I don't have to do, like maybe there's a piece of me that just knows what to do with this because I haven't found it yet. Is that possible given where we are now?
I hope so, because if it isn't, then there's no hope of a future. Because if we aren't created already in the image of God, there is nothing for Christ to save.
I was just pondering, there are so many different ideas of what it means to be created in God's image. Does it mean that we are created with a certain kind of rationality? Does it mean we're created with a moral code or a moral compass? Does it mean that we are physically created in some kind of godlike image? There are a lot of different interpretations of that. So I think it also depends on what your interpretation is of what it means to be created in the image of God.
Wow. I grew up feeling like my dad was an image, and I felt like it was a pretty good image. My dad had a temper. I have a temper. And I felt like the God of the Bible had a real bad temper problem. And so, as you just said that, I'm thinking, what were the parts that, you were taking with you, and to make it as far as you did in teaching multiple minds about God. And you said that in that mentoring youth and young adult leaders in spiritual disciplines, minus a healthy relationship with God. And, he said it didn't say that, but it should have. And that one also just really felt personal. I felt a lot of people that were worshiping there and even online that were like, yeah, I resonate with that I don't always know. And sometimes even now, I mean, just, and I don't know that I'll speak for yours truly, feel like I have it all together. Like sometimes it'll feel really close and it'll feel really like I have an understanding. It'll feel like I am on a good path. And then seemingly nothing changes. It doesn't like anything really negative or positive or whatever. It's just another week. And you're like, man, my relationship with God sucks. What happened? I mean, so I wonder, again, what Melanie was talking about, there's so many different ways that we can identify on how we may be created in his image. And maybe it's this more of a subconscious thing that we deal with. And I was hoping that maybe you had some insight there, just because I feel that a lot. And I feel like I can't be the only person when things don't seem to change, like routines. I'm still reading my Bible. I'm still praying. I'm still feeling God there. And then it'll just like the light switch just turned off. And is this one of those, oh no, we're going to have a season like Alicia? we're going into that. And we're like, okay, now I better, buck up because it could be bad times, or I don't know. It just seems odd to me that way.
Well, I kind of look at it the same way as I look at any relationship. I think of marriage. My wife and I will be doing the same activities, same interactions, and some days it seems like there's a great connection, and other days on the surface you couldn't tell the difference as to why suddenly the connection isn't the same. And most of the time I don't think we stop long enough then to do any introspection of what's going on under the surface. On the surface we go, yeah, it's not the same, but it should be because I've done all the same things. But I think this goes back to just going through the motions of it doesn't make it
the same.
Well, I think that's really interesting, Randy, because there are two things that you mentioned about, making your relationship with God better, praying, reading your Bible. And those are actually two things that Nate mentioned in terms of connection. Maybe that's not your connection.
Yeah. But sometimes it works. So, and that's the interesting part about, because I looked at it and I was like, all right, I'm going to have to do this, because I think now I'm about to do, this is I think I've done 5 of the disc, all the ones you mentioned and then some. And so I'm like, well, why not one more? And this one actually intrigues me because I'm looking at like the 9 things. It's sensory. Well, let's see. I think I have them wrote. Oh, here they are. The beautiful are mystical, sacramental, sensory. The true is rational, doctrinal, scripture-driven. And the good is sharing, ascetic, and enthusiastic. I mean, like, none of them are bad.
Nope.
I love the mystery sometimes, but then other times that drives me nuts, because it's like, well, why can't you just have given us the answer, right? Like, why do we have to do this to, answer the questions that don't have any, or like, why did this happen? The tragedies that just make no sense. And then, so I find like each one of these, and now I am so curious. And I think that's what everyone else was feeling, was like, wow, maybe this isn't how I'm connecting to God, or maybe it's not how I should be. So going back to that cathedral experience, you mentioned it. Kids are ready to go, like, Dad, it's an empty building. Why are we still here? And you're like, no.
Yeah.
I could stay here probably, all day and then some, and still be trying to figure this out. Can you describe in more detail what happened there? Because it was really curious to me, because I felt like I've had that before. It's almost like a deja vu, and I was curious as to how that kind of played out for you.
Yeah, it was a place where I went from head knowledge to heart. And so then all of a sudden, I appreciate where I took with the message, in the message mentioned in Romans, where Paul says the Holy Spirit steps in, because suddenly words weren't part of the description. I'm like, I don't know, there's just this presence, And at the same time, the head screaming, you're in an empty cathedral. What are you doing? And so there was this, there was some of this, wow, I feel this closeness to God that I'm not used to experiencing. It was feelings. It wasn't like I could give a Bible study on it,
Right.
It was one of those things you're like, well, you had to have been there and felt the same thing I did type feeling. And it's like, I'm not sure what to do with this. There's no head skills to, hey, here's how you get back to that.
So then, has that experience been then replicated in other settings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Passion Conference.
I've mentioned the Passion Conference. Now it happens oftentimes, I can be looking at a piece of artwork, and I can't tell you why one and not another. But those times happen, and I've just learned, when I sense it, stop everything else and just be in it.
And just do it, yeah.
Just experience it.
The other part, the Passion Conference, before they quit doing it, Catalyst was one that was presented in Atlanta as well.
Yep.
And I think it went 10 years in a row. Used to be the designated van driver for one of the, the groups that went up, and we would go every year. And the one year that I remember that cathedral experience, and I've always loved music, but like never really, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I can't tell you, like, Michael W. Who? Like I can't tell you any of the Christian artists. It's never been my thing. And we went that year they had a special guest. It was Early Gunger.
Okay.
And they did beautiful things with cellos and light percussion. Lights were low, and it was like a 9-minute meditative version.
Okay.
And I started crying, and I didn't know why. And I'm not a person that tends to cry very easily. Like, talking about my girls, and I get emotional, obviously, things like that. But for the most part, I'm not. I don't cry much. I'm not that type of person, and it wouldn't be, and especially in a public setting, that would totally not be cool. It wasn't cool. I was very upset, but in the moment, I couldn't stop, and it was beautiful.
Yeah. And
since then, it's been more of when I just get time by myself. And a lot of it is my Harley. Last week I went for a 2-hour ride by myself, and it was that very same thing. And so I get when you said that, I was like, man, like I am feeling Nate at a different level here, because when the words don't make any sense, like why? I mean, here I'm sitting in a group of all different. Well, I was probably one of the older people from our group, but just like crying, like just this. Like ridiculous, and I'm like in it. I was so embarrassed, number one, but secretly I was just like, I wish this moment wouldn't end, even though there was that conflict. But so you mentioned that you can do different, like this assessment. Like you mentioned the DISC assessment, which kind of helps people when they're working figure out like, hey, Randy's an overbearing D, and I'm an A over here. How do I get along with this fool? Like I can't take it. Yeah. And so, is there a way? And I just want to make sure that as we're talking about these three, is there something that you've found after taking it that would help you understand and really maybe build bridges? Because I feel like a lot of people at church are like, oh, well, I think I know who Nate is. Yeah. And I'd like to be his friend, but I feel like we're maybe it's that same thing. We're on a different scale. Is this something that could really be useful to someone in that? Like,
if you are willing to go through the book, and as I think I mentioned, at least in one of the sermons, it isn't an easy read. It's not the easiest read, I think, mostly because it's a translation from German into English. So it's
ouch.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of headiness in it.
You don't speak German?
I don't speak German.
And you don't speak Spanish.
And
Come on, man.
Definitely don't speak Spanish.
Oh,
wow.
I'm a little disappointed.
Yeah.
That's right.
But the second or the third section of the book is all about working with those and learning how to embrace those that perhaps are on the opposite side of the wheel, as I call it, how to interact with them, also how to practice and exercise your spirituality in some of the ways that maybe aren't your natural style, and you're never going to bring them up to your natural style, but you can actually find ways to connect to God through those, and maybe it won't be quite so formal or rigid feeling when you if you continue to practice it.
When you were talking about what was it in the afternoon, you were describing to everyone like, oh, I just want to go over here and I just want to be in nature, and it's like, no, we need a Bible study, and you're like, no. And the look on your face was so good. Like there was no question in my mind that if Nate had to do that, he'd be like, oh, come on, that this isn't me. And yet I feel like we, just like anything else in life, our spirituality, we like to rate how we're doing against other people, so I really felt like in that moment, as you're being vulnerable about like, well, I'm a pastor and I'm supposed to be doing this, and it's like, please don't ask me to give a Bible study. Wait, what? You're a pastor? Isn't that what isn't that the first thing on your job description is like, anytime anyone asks for a Bible study, you must say yes.
And you must pray over every single meal, no matter where you are or who you're with.
I don't even think that goes in the contract anymore. That's just like, if you don't step up and do it, you're fired. Like that everyone knows that, right? And the other part I really liked about this, because I feel like I've been at a lot of churches where this is the culture, and I feel like we do a pretty good job here. I know we're aware of it, and you said sometimes it's not for me, but for someone else. Speaking about, maybe the service, maybe the message, maybe the music is not for me this week, but it's for someone else. And I love that, because sometimes you're at a church where this is what it is, and there is no like real variety, or there's not a willingness to say, well, maybe we should try something, different, or, maybe see how that works. And I wanted to ask you, Melanie, how do you see that at WholeLife, maybe at least in worship, like leading our community, those that worship here every week and the online family that joins us? How do we balance that? Because after you start looking at the wheel and these 9 different things, you're like, wow, there is a ton of reasons why someone might, type an email that was like, church didn't really sit well with me today. And how do we do that? And what's our intentionality?
Well, it's really interesting. And actually, I was a little challenged. Nate and I had a conversation last week because I try to think through these things and think about different ways different people connect. Some people are more visual. Some people are more, they experience through hearing. And actually, I had a couple of our youth come and talk to me and tell me that they wish that we had more intentional times of intimate prayer.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
And I really appreciated them coming and talking to me about that because I hadn't realized that was, maybe a piece that some people were missing. And last week when Nate and I were having a conversation, we were talking about the imagery of the cross. And I was saying, I don't love that imagery because I feel like we're beyond the cross. There was a resurrection and now there's new life. And yet, we sometimes will fixate on this instrument of torture as though that is, the instrument of salvation rather than, well, I shouldn't say rather than. But then as Nate and I were talking, he was talking about how, iconography is important to him in his worship, just having an object to look at, not an object to worship, obviously, but an object to look at and meditate on. And I realized, okay, maybe I need to make sure that we also have those opportunities where there is, something visual for people who want to meditate on a particular object or a shape, a cross, or whatever. Nate, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
So in reflecting and all those type of things of where I have found the connection, I even mentioned it at Union Adventist University, the university church there has stained glass windows. And I know they depict 7 angels of Revelation. You can go investigate that on your own later on. But yeah.
We're not going to unpack that here right now.
Not unpacking that
Okay,
one.
all right. I'll trust the doctors in the room.
Yeah. But they have this depictions in the church. And for somebody like me who really is drawn to an image or a visual to meditate on, to connect with, that always gave me something, even on the worship services, that I wasn't connecting with the sermon or the music. There was always that visual that I could go back to and just wonder about the guy looking up at the angel or whatever, whichever piece of it, and going, oh, I wonder what that, and then next thing you know, I'm off on this experience with God of what that might be like. And a beautiful interaction, church service is over, and I go, it's a great day. It was an amazing service. And well, what happened? I don't know.
I couldn't tell you.
I didn't hear the sermon.
Well, and I loved how you said it was really, after you went through that cathedral experience at the Passion Conference, the freedom and permission to experience God. And the more I've thought about that since that moment, because in the chat, there were people like, whoa. Like the freedom and permission. I think freedom, we get that, but the permission part, I think is difficult to do. And earlier on you said, well, it used to be a bad thing if someone were to say, well, I think I'm saved. Don't say that too loud. Don't say it too loud.
So presumptuous.
Be respectful and totally not throwing shade. I mean, that is, I have close family that still are still struggling with that piece. And I'm just like, wow, this is so much. There's so much that and I don't want to say, some of it's work, but also when you're in that experience, it's not work. It's beautiful. Right. It's confirming. It's all those things.
It's formational.
Yes. And so I feel like on the other side, people really need to hear that part, the freedom and the permission to experience God, because there's, on the other side, I want to read a question that T. Cinco sent to us. Thank you so much, Tammy. And she said, all of the sections on the spectrum from doctrine to mysticism, this is the 3 that we're talking about, rely on a personal journey So, what is the anchor, and how do I keep from becoming skewed or imbalanced in my relationship with Christ? How can my mysticism or my enthusiasm after what I understand is biblical or doctrinal truth? And that's, I think, on the other side where it's like, okay, well, I'm saved. Right, I said it. I don't know if I believe it, but I said it. But then I think the natural thought is, oh, well, there's Nate over there. I know he's told me he's a mystical person. So, I mean, where does that end? Because I'm having so much trouble on this side, just saying, I'm pretty sure that everyone that believes will not perish and have everlasting life. I think I'm going to believe that one. But just in case, maybe I'll have my doubts. But on the other side, immediately going, oh, I don't know if I could get to that part, because that's even more scary than me saying this part. How do we stay balanced and know that, like you said, sometimes I have to switch focus to keep myself connected to God? How do we do that with what we've been talking about? And now you have and now it's like, is this a menu that I pick from? How do I do this?
I think that's important to remember that this is drawn as a circle. It's not a straight line. And so there's always an offsetting balance on the other side. And I think we need to keep that in mind, especially the need of community. This is where your church community, your church family plays a role. Don't just become friends with those that have the same connection to God style. You find those on the opposite side to keep you balanced, and vice versa. You're maintaining their balance.
So that means you have to go to Bible study, Nate.
Yeah, and I somehow have,
It's like, doggone it.
18 years of pastoral ministry. I did a lot of Bible studies.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting, and you alluded to this a little bit in your message, but the fact that different denominations actually tend to end up in different places on the wheel. And you mentioned that Adventism kind of is over on that, doctrinal, scripture-driven section. What else have you found as you've researched this?
Obviously, as you just mentioned, each, I'll say, type of Christian, this was obviously done for the Christian community. So we're looking at Christian denominations, faith groups. Each faith group tends to land as their structural DNA, the way they organize, the way they've built their theology. They have strengths because of that. They also have weaknesses. I would say within the Adventist church, we have a weakness in the picture of a loving God because we are so Scripture-driven,
Sure.
which is not a bad thing.
Sure,
But with any of these, if you don't have some sort of balance on the other side, you kind of fall off the wagon. And that's the reality with any of these. When you get into some of the more Orthodox churches, you're going to be over there in that a very sacramental type, very can be very beautiful, but you may wonder if there's anything behind it.
Okay.
Which, if you think about Orthodox or a Catholic church setting, they're very much into the icons. They're very much into the sacraments. They're very much that side. But they may, they're obviously a lot weaker on the Scripture-driven side of things. And so you see some of these variances, and you can, once you've read through and get familiar with, you can almost immediately recognize, oh, that's where that church kind of lands around the circle, and that
Sure.
one. But then what's really crazy is within a denomination, every local church creates their own DNA, and you'll see that some churches, their DNA doesn't match up to their denomination, and they're usually the ones that are constantly battling their denomination, or you'll hear, regular about how awful their denomination is, and if you're a visitor, you go in and go, I wonder why they're still part of this denomination. They don't seem to really agree with it. And it's because oftentimes they are just so polar opposite of the denomination they're affiliated with, that it feels like, I'm not sure why the connection.
Like
why did you stick to it? You know,
what was that connection to start with?
Right.
No, I like the idea though that within a church community, that knowing these 9 different things within these 3 categories, it makes a lot of sense when you know that someone, maybe you just didn't realize at first. You're like, well, are they just being obtuse? Are they just trying to get under my skin? Is it just, or is it like this really who they are? And I think it gives a legitimacy to the fact that there are ways. I mean, I think we know it, but maybe knowing it in more specifics, or knowing that there are these specifics that can maybe help us digest this and then look across and say, oh, okay, I get that. We're going to totally not connect on certain things in this way. But like you said, maybe that person becomes more of a balance. And honestly, some of the best relationships can be the balanced relationships, because you're getting fed something, or you're at least being challenged with something that you're like, I don't know if I believe that. But you know what? I know Nate's a good person. I can just feel it. So maybe this isn't wrong for me, or it's not bad theology. It's just different than what I'm used to doing, or what I'm comfortable with. And I feel like it moves the needle from where you might be on there. And some of the coolest things that I believe now in my heart that I didn't believe 10, 15 years ago, before we moved to Florida, well, it's been almost 20 now. Those are some of the things I hold dearest. And 20 years ago, I'd have been like, nah, no. But there was no balance, because where I was from, it was all just like, well, we're all over here, right? Because that's where truth is. And if you're not where truth is, well, there's no point in this, which is why I think many people in our generation were like, all right, then. See. Like, because if it's not for me, and this is where the truth lies, and this doesn't make any sense to me, it has no feel. And I know that, people say, well, now we're talking about formative, things in a bad way, or spiritualism, because it's all about the feel. But if there's no feel ever, then also, like you said, maybe you're just in the wrong part of that circle to really be fed the way you need to be, to then be more rounded for yourself.
Well, what's so interesting about what you just described, Randy, is a lot of these different denominations that we talked about on this wheel. For example, the section that is more sacramental, more mystical, more focused on icons. If you look at the cultural context out of which that denomination was developed, that represented cultural views at the time. And then later, when we moved from like pre-modern times into modern times, and then we have the Enlightenment and rationalism and scientific and positivism and all that kind of thing came along. That is the context, that's the cultural context that Adventism came out of. So as Adventism emerged from that context, the focus was rational, logical, proof text, break it down. And also at the same time, there was a lot of spiritualism. So the push was, we're going to stay away from this spiritualism movement, which means we're not going to feel this. We're going to know it with our minds, and we're going to be able to prove it. And now
that's not a bad thing if you're starting a denomination, right? Like, so, because if you don't have that part, aren't you just everybody else? If you're not looking at, like, we're really searching past what we feel other people maybe haven't looked at as much, and that's where we're trying to put our base in reality and on fact and on that. It seems like a good place to start. And
I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that is the foundation on which Adventism was built. So now that we have moved into, postmodern, metamodern cultural era, when we have proof texts and we have, rational explanations and prophecy seminars and all of these things that basically our denomination was founded on, now we have a different cultural context. So now it's much more difficult to talk with somebody and proof text your way through something because nobody cares in this cultural context. So I think that's one of the challenges if your denominational belief system was built on that rational, scientific foundation. Now, how do we translate that into a new cultural intellectual paradigm? And if you look at the denominations that have come out of like the postmodernism, there's going to be a lot more of the enthusiastic, Pentecostalism is going gangbusters right now around the globe. And that's not built on that scientific, rational. It's very much in the moment, and it's very much contextual. So I guess I'm wondering, as I hear you talk about your experience with, here's what the truth was when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And now I have come to this other place. It's almost as if, the cultural milieu that you're in has changed the conditions for belief such that you are able to think about spirituality and God differently outside of the rational box.
Yeah. I think the proof texts become less important. That sounds bad, but I think it feels less important to me than the permission that we talked about previously, just because I feel like if we are created in the image of God and he created us to be curious, he created us to be in relationship, you're constantly learning something new about somebody in a relationship. And I don't know that the proof text changes, but its meaning can change as you as you find out more about God and you see in your life things that it's like, oh man, that is like mimicking like a Bible story, or at least a thought process, whether that's a true story or allegory, like we talked about last week with Job. And that something happens and you go, whoa, I would have said before, there's no way this is as close to black and white as we should humanly be possible to think of. And now I have to say, I've seen it in action. I've felt it. I've watched it unfold. And now that I have permission to talk to God and really him and I work it out, that may not be comfortable for Nate with what I come up with, or for Melanie, but I feel like it doesn't necessarily change, but it does. The meaning can change. So yeah, I guess it does. I guess it does change. But growing up, it didn't feel like there was an opportunity, or there certainly wasn't an encouragement, but there was no opportunity for me to say, maybe we don't know everything. And maybe some of it can just be we're not going to know, even though that in my personality drives me crazy. But when it comes to God, it's like, well, there's so many verses. Who can know God? Who can understand when he dresses Job down like, yo, where were you when, blah, and you're like, whoa. So to me, that takes a different story, and it makes it more beautiful. It makes it better. It makes it more diverse. It makes it more colorful, and something that I can digest. So I think that's maybe the difference for me from what you were just describing. But then I hear someone saying, well, if it changes, is it really truth? Because the truth doesn't change. But what if God's truth is so complex that we don't even really have a firm grasp of everything? He's dumbed it down to what we can kind of grasp and kind of figure out. And he's just like, just be in a relationship with me and don't make it so difficult. And I feel like that's the other part that this really helps in, is don't make it so difficult. Find out how you communicate with me best, and then let's work from that point of view. That's the part I really appreciated about that freedom and what you talked about.
And I think that's important for anyone who's exploring this, is to remember that God is all 9 of these.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And he uses all 9. The Godhead is always involved in all these forms. And that means that God's always connecting.
Oh, man. I hadn't thought of it that way. Just that, like, yes, obviously it is, but when you said it, it just made it hit home that much harder. That's awesome. All right, we are running out of time, but I do want to get to a couple of because if you come to WholeLife and you don't get to hear the people that were moved from your message, did you even preach at WholeLife? So from our online family, Anonymous said, I believe God is calling us to him in many ways, always his way, not our own. And then Kim said, Nate Elias, such a powerful talk. Loved learning to see my walk with God and the walk of the whole body of Christ from this perspective. Thanks for sharing your story and insights so candidly. This will be a sermon we remember. And I was like, that was kind of the overall sentiment that was happening. And Elias said, sometimes we find our faith when we are unfaithful, when we don't reach for him. He reaches for us. There is no right way, just his way. He knows. And I was like, wow, that's pretty profound too. It's like, he knows where you fall there. He knows what, and that's what he's trying to. So that the last thing it was something that I wrote down while you were preaching. What do we miss from God when we're like, well, God doesn't speak to me, or I feel like it's pretty lonely over here, God. And what do you feel now that you're enjoying, or that you're more connected since you found out about this than you were prior?
I would say I get to encounter God a whole lot more. Silence from God is rare.
Wow.
That would be my...
Silence from God is rare. Well, if you haven't ordered your copy, swipe up in today's show notes, because I don't know. I feel like that's what we're all searching for, right? Is confirmation that, we're on the right track, or that we could possibly find favor with God. And it sounds really good to me. Nate, we could go on and on and on. I feel like what you presented was really unique, but also a story that's been told so many times. But finding some things like, hey, maybe here's an answer, or here's a starting point that could also help you. I love it when we leave homework that people can find out more and maybe not have the silence be as loud as it has been for them. And that is super exciting. So thank you not only for your message, thank you for coming in early to tape the podcast. Someone's making coffee in the hall. Come on. This is torture. Stop it.
I think Nate should start a small community on exploring your spirituality and connections. I'm just saying.
No pressure, though, because on the podcast, I mean, so if you were inundated with requests next week, hashtag you're welcome. And speaking of next week, we are going to be welcoming he's a teenager, right?
He is.
Yeah, he's still a teenager. I was like, he looks like he just graduated college and is about to start his career at a Fortune 500 company. I feel like he's always put together. He's always...
Well, and he is just wise and mature beyond his years.
Yeah.
So.
Omari Gregory will be bringing us the next message, number 3 in Voices of WholeLife. So if you're just catching this episode and you didn't get last week's with Alicia, please go back, swipe up in today's show notes. You can catch all of those actual messages in Speaking of Grace, our sister podcast. And of course, Nate's message, if you didn't listen to it, it was a good combination of entertaining, because Nate's just entertaining, and he's got that voice that in the stories and the smile that just keep you going. And then when you get to this book and this piece, it's like, oh boy, now I need to really pay attention. And then next week with Omari, how do we represent God? Do you know? Well, but she doesn't give any details. I was like, I know you have a manuscript of this sermon already, don't you?
I actually don't have the manuscript yet, but we've had some great conversations. And I do happen to know that we are going to spend some time in the book of Job. So we've been talking about Job for the last couple of weeks, just sort of on the side, and now we're going to go there.
Like I said, it's my favorite every year just because we get to know somebody better, and it's been good to get to know Nate better. I hope you all got to know Nate better this week. And if you have any more questions about this, I would love to hear them just even for all of us, because this freedom and permission, I can't get this out of my mind, and I'm drawing things in my mind. I'm reconnecting things, and it's been really, really awesome. So I hope that was your experience as well. So, all right. Anything else that we missed? I think that's it, right? It's Omari. And then do we have one more after that?
We have two more.
Two more.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're not even halfway.
We're not even halfway.
Oh, that makes my heart feel good. Okay, good. Excellent. Again, Nate, thank you for joining us. It was just very, very insightful and awesome. And next week, Ken will be back, right? Is he going to be home?
Does he still work here?
Nate's not trying to laugh into the microphone because he's like, Ken will hear this. But
no, I believe the odds are very, very good that we'll have Ken next week.
Okay, because it does feel like he hasn't been, in air quotes, home for a while. Like, hey, it feels like, come on, where's our Ken? But also, you're not going to hear him preach, so does it matter if he's here?
I don't know. I think that just in order to bask in his presence,
he needs to be here. Yeah, I know. I hope. Ken, you better be listening to this, is all I'm going to say. All right, everyone, thank you for listening, and have a fantastic week. Oh, shucks.
I'm in so much trouble.